that happens. So time flies. The next step, we have a bunch of camps to talk about. The summer will be here. And then before you know it, we'll be having a conversation about training camp and the regular season. So how's it going? Busy time, isn't it?
Yeah, I love the NFL draft, and it's a lot of fun putting the puzzle together. But there is a nice sense of peace and finality to when it's over, and finally, just instead of diving into 300 prospects, understanding which 10 to 20 dudes you really gotta, including undrafted free agents, obviously, learn even more about, and then you can really start to put together the team puzzle as opposed to just the overall NFL draft puzzle.
I hear you, and that's what we're going to try to do here. So if you have any questions for RJ during the live portion of the broadcast, comments, just let us know. Otherwise, if you catch us on demand, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And if you have any questions, even post live production, you can still let us know in the comment section. Okay, so we are going to get to some of those signings that took place after the draft. But of course, let's first of all take a look at what the Cowboys did. And we have to start right at the top with the first pick. And, up until that point, RJ, as far as the draft was concerned, I think everything was going pretty normal. And then the Cowboys pick came. And when they, when the name came out, and I'll be honest with you, as much as we think Booker is one of the top guards, of course, in this draft, we don't usually see guards taken in the top 15 of the NFL draft unless you've got like superstar potential, unless you are an elite level player at that position. Now, I know this is not a strong class, and maybe that had a little bit to do with it. He moves up a little bit more than normal. But what was the overall reaction for the fan base? Was this expected? Was this, oh my God, I can't believe it took a guard with the 12th pick in the draft? What was the overall consensus?
So I would say that obviously last year the Cowboys took a tackle in the first round in Tyler Guyton, and it was presumed he would play that way. So the last two instances that were really comparable were Tyler Smith 3 years ago in 22 and Zach Martin, obviously 11 years ago. And the Zach Martin thing, as you recall, was very controversial because Johnny football had a lot of fans in the state of Texas, a lot of crossover, Cowboys fans. But I would say that this, and I think every Cowboys fan hopes that it's the case, it feels very similar to the Tyler Smith pick in the sense of, they kind of got wiped out, and that's where it kind of feels, if I compare it to anything, it feels like the Micah Parsons draft. And obviously you hope that he's as successful as Micah in that, and that was the last time the Cowboys were picking this high. They ultimately took Micah at 12, or they took Booker. And at that time in 2021, we all went into it saying, okay, it's going to be one of Patrick Surtain or JC Horn. That's who it's going to be. And the debate all off season was, which one do you like more, whatever. And they went, 8 and 9, and Dallas was sitting at 10. And so nobody really anticipated both of them being gone. And that was why everybody in that moment said, trade out, get back, get out. And Philadelphia called, Dallas moved back, and you land Parsons, and you just kind of make lemonade. And I think this was that. I think if Ted McMillan had made it, Dallas would have jumped on that. And I think he was the only receiver, only kind of toy. Everybody wanted a toy. And I think that's where the disappointment comes from. I think that, everybody ultimately understands, though, this is what's for the greater good. This is a really, solid step into a new era under Brian Schottenheimer. So I think people have made their peace with it. It's just, okay. I do think if they had passed on McMillan for Booker, that there would be a little bit more rioting in the streets. So ultimately, I think people are okay.
Well, I tend to like to do this. Like, obviously, if we were just talking like right after day one, and that's it, we would just talk about day one only, I think I'd have a little bit different perspective regarding what the Cowboys did with their first pick. But when I take a look at the whole, and I did this even a couple of years ago with the Cowboys, I don't even know if it was last year or a couple of years ago, where I really wasn't sure about what they did with their first pick, but I actually liked the whole. And that's what I'm looking at here as well. When it's all said and done, who cares where it was picked? What's your draft class look like? Let me see it. And when I see the Cowboys draft class, especially early on, I think there's a lot of talent there, including one of my favorite players who I have been really high on for a couple of months now. And he got hot as we got closer and closer to the draft. And you know what? I feel like if we had another couple of weeks, he would have been a first-round pick. And that's Donovan Ezeruku. I mean, this kid, if you look at him on tape, which I'm sure you have, he's just a monster. And I know there's size limitations, but he makes up for it in a variety of different ways. And I really like that pick, including, of course, getting Rebel, a very talented corner who could end up the best corner in the entire draft in round 3. So again, I thought in general there was some talent here overall. And I think the Cowboy fans, in my opinion, should be happy.
Yeah, I think very often, to your point, day 2 softens day 1. Now, I hope Tyler Booker isn't like this, but for me, the example for that is always 2017 for Dallas. They took Taco Charlton, and everybody was really pissed off that they passed on TJ Watt, and that has aged really well. That take at least. And then on day 2, they came back and got Chidobe Awuzie and Jordan Lewis. And Chido only played his rookie contract in Dallas, but he was very good. And Jordan Lewis just left. And that was, 8 years ago at this point in time. And so this feels similar. Again, I think that we all think highly or more highly of Tyler Booker than we did of Taco Charlton at the time. But to your point, adding Donovan and Savon, Savon, who, by the way, locked up your Michigan Wolverines a couple of years ago when he was healthy. And I think, we've been, in all the content we've created, we've asked Cowboys fans, like, what pick are you most excited about? What pick do you like the most? And everybody kind of settles on Savon Ravel. Granted, there is a bit of unknown or worry just because of coming back from the ACL injury. But to your point, he might have the highest ceiling or the highest return on investment capability. And beyond that, he also marries the most position of need. The Cowboys didn't have an enormous need at guard. They didn't have an enormous need at edge rusher. But, and I use our lads every single day, that you can see the Trayvon Diggs situation. There's some lack of clarity on Trayvon Diggs this season, at least early on. There's some lack of clarity in the long term relative to DaRon Bland if they're going to give him an extension. I just mentioned that Jordan Lewis left. So, this was a team. Every mock draft that I did, at least for the last 30 days, involved, in the top 100 picks, some sequence of receiver, running back, corner. So the fact that they came away with a corner in their top 100 picks lined up with that. And that's why I think that's the pick that everyone's really sinking their teeth into right now.
Yeah, because again, I think, our staff, especially, of course, our top guys, really believe Rebel could be, look, we all got to get through the injury, and every player is like this. But as long as the injury just is behind him and he's the player that he's scouted to be, he is going to have a very successful career in the NFL. Let's stick with let's start with the secondary, Dan. So just taking a look at the depth chart here, the one obvious, and you just mentioned, of course, Jordan Lewis going, the one obvious spot that seems to be pretty open, unless you know something we don't, being a Cowboy insider, is the nickel spot. So are you surprised that they didn't go after someone for that spot? Do you think Rebel they're counting on him to be ready to go early, you believe, and somehow he'll factor into that spot as well? Where do they stand right now as far as their secondary, and what is the biggest issue?
Yeah, from a safety standpoint, I think that they're pretty set. Although Donovan Wilson has, kind of regressed a little bit since getting the contract a couple of years ago. But all told, I think everybody kind of trusts what's been happening there. The corner spot is obviously in flux, to say the least. Now, the nickel situation is very interesting because obviously Jordan Lewis has handled it for a long time. But if you recall, or if anybody recalls, 2 years ago, the Cowboys were going at their season with Trayvon Diggs and Stephon Gilmore lined up on the outside. And DaRon Bland, who was entering his second year in the NFL at the time, was set to play the nickel. And 2 weeks into the season, Trayvon Diggs tears his ACL. He's out for the season. That kicks DaRon Bland outside. That makes Jordan Lewis have to play the nickel and revitalizes Jordan Lewis's career to some degree, and led to DaRon Bland having the pick 6 year that he did and whatnot. That honestly might not have happened if not for the Trayvon Diggs situation that pushed him outside. And so since then, the Cowboys have kind of been chasing the proverbial carrot. We have really yet to, since DaRon Bland became somebody, see him and Trayvon Diggs operating as the two outside corners just because of injuries and things like that. DaRon Bland had a foot fracture at the beginning of last season. And so I suppose if there's an argument, I guess is the best way to put it, to say, maybe you return to DaRon Bland playing nickel and Trayvon Diggs and Kaiir Elam are your outside, your boundary corners, depending on how much they like Kaiir Elam. Obviously, they traded for him.
Yeah.
So there are I hate to ride the fence, but there are a number of possible
Okay.
permutations, and some of that, again, I would offer does depend on their long-term view of Deron Bland. If they want to pay him, how do they want to pay him? Do they want to pay him as an outside corner? Do they want to pay him as a nickel corner? So there's quite frankly just too many balls in the air to come to a complete judgment at this point in time.
Are there any, because as we can see here in what would we call that color? The Dolphins color, teal.
Sure. Aqua, yeah.
Aqua. I like that better. So those are the college free agent signings. So out of all the signings they made, and what were there, 6 or 7, I believe?
Yeah, there's 7, I believe, as of this moment.
Okay, so there's 5 on defense, and then 3 on offense, the 2 wide receivers and the tight end. And then you've got the 5 on defense, as far as we can see here. So 4 of them, though, half of them are in the secondary. Is that, I'm assuming that's by design, because this looks like the one position that there's a lot of, like we're just talking about, there's a lot of questions. We're not sure exactly how things are going to work out. So let's try to bring in some more bodies, some more depth, the more pieces we have to play with, the more chances that will be successful. Out of those signings, because it's always interesting to find out who made a couple $100,000 as far as a guaranteed signing, and I heard somewhere like the Eagles, I think every team gets us a couple million or something like that. And I heard the Eagles gave my boy Holland Pierce from Rutgers like a considerable amount of cash. Might have even been like $800,000 or something. So every team's different. Was there a big number at all with any of these DBs? And by the way, we might even have to include Justin Barron, because Justin Barron's got the ability to play both linebacker and defensive back.
Yeah, I would say that nothing really stands out yet in terms of reported salaries. It hasn't been even a full week. Obviously, those details will emerge. To your point, though, I know you have the defense on screen, but offensively, last year, Brevin Spanford, the tight end, had the highest mark of any UDFA. And so, to your point, that was this blinking red light of, okay, this dude's absolutely going to make the roster. Like, there's no way that they paid him all this money not to do it. And, you can kind of read it, between the lines there and suggest that somebody at his position isn't going to make the roster. Last year, that was Peyton Hendershot as an example. And so it's not obvious who that is. I would offer that the highest level of intrigue that people have is with Treshaun Holden at wide receiver right now. Some of that is that he's a receiver, and some of that is that it's the toy aspect and element, and that Dallas doesn't really have any receivers right now.
Yeah.
And some of it is just, it's such a trope to have a favorite, UDFA wide receiver at training camp and somebody to make highlight plays and things like that. It's a little bit more difficult to kind of get behind a UDFA somewhere else, but he's the clubhouse favorite right now. But, these guys just, hit the shotgun start. They're barely off the tee.
Yeah. And definitely we'll walk back to receiver. Just out of these names, though, these 5, I will say that, and at all 8 players, the one guy that sticks out for me, because I had him as one of my sleeper players in the draft that was barely hanging on in the draft guide to even be there, is Barron. Mm-hmm. I like Barron. I've seen quite enough film on him to say, you know what, because I like his size too, depending on, he could be a nice little chess piece. As I mentioned, he could play linebacker, he could play defensive back. I like his playmaking ability. A lot of tackles there at Syracuse the last couple of years. And they also added, of course, Elijah Clark from Syracuse too, who, by the way, has a 5th round grade at our lad. So a couple of guys to keep an eye on. Mike Smith Jr. also is somebody that sticks out. I believe he's from Eastern Kentucky. But Justin Barron, even though Clark has the 5th round grade, Barron is the one that I'm intrigued with the most. So I don't know if you've had enough time yourself to do any research and go over any of these guys yet.
No, to your point, it's still, we're just now kind of, taking the plastic off, you know what I mean, on some of these players further down I won't say the draft class, but the haul that the Cowboys had last week. But I will say that immediately corner is not necessarily a position that seems like you can squeak in on. Now, some of that depends on, does Trayvon Diggs start the season on injured reserve?
Yes.
That opens the door, obviously, for somebody. But I mean, I would offer the following players are absolutely on your 53. Trayvon, obviously Savon Ravel, Kyrie Elam's making the team, just to look at, the way they're sorted out here. Deron Bland, Kalen Carson, Josh Butler. We're already at 5. Izzy Mukwamu, 6. So, I mean, it's, you fill up rather quickly. And so, and I don't know that I put any stock into this, but a week ago, literally, at least the day we're chatting, Stephon Gilmore was seen at the Star in Frisco when the Cowboys were having their pre-draft press conference, and they threw cold water on that said it was coincidental. He was there for something else.
Yeah.
There's a million things happening at
Sure.
the building, whatever. But so, I mean, if something materialized, they love to bring in guys at training camp. I mean, again, that how it goes. The pecking order gets reevaluated and whatnot.
Yep.
So this is just, I mean, again, as opposed to wide receiver where, there's a spot there to be had right now. It doesn't, the neighborhood is much more crowded at corner right now.
And you mentioned Elam. Let's keep in mind that Elam and Andrew Booth, both high picks in the NFL draft. And look, sometimes this is what these kids need. They need a second change. I mean, sometimes it's a third change.
Right.
And if I find the right system, not saying that either of these guys are going to hit it, but they are intriguing. And when you're looking for all the help you can get, why not add them to the list and see if lightning strikes? Is there a player here, by the way, before we move on, is there a player here that we do outside of Dallas that we really don't know? Because a lot of these guys we don't know. Someone that is a Dallas player, not any of the rookies, that it may even be Mukumu. How do you pronounce his name?
Mukuamu.
Yeah. So is Mukuamu the obvious guy that maybe sticks out the most from your point of view? Or is there another name here that we need to keep an eye on?
Sticks out in what sense?
That, you know what? Don't be surprised if he starts or gets significant reps, and he'll probably deserve it based on what we've seen so far.
Izzy Mukuamu is he was a safety who the Cowboys drafted out of South Carolina. He played in the same backfield as J.C. Horn, and so that everybody was kind of in on him for that reason. And he's moved around a bit, played some safety. He's played some nickel corner, which is why he's listed there right now. So he's kind of been all over the place, and a lot of that was just kind of the vision of Dan Quinn. I would say, I mean, if we're really casting a wide net across the defense, I would offer Maris Liufau, who you have listed starting at middle linebacker right now. Okay. Some of that is that DeMarvion Overshown is probably not going to be available to start the season. I hope he is, certainly. But Maris really came on strong last year after Overshown got hurt. He had a great performance in the Carolina game. He was very infamously, their third-round pick last year, when they did not have a fourth-round pick, and then the run on running backs happened in that fourth round. And so everybody was screaming, take your running back now, Friday night, because you're not going to have this fourth-round pick tomorrow. But they really wanted Maris Liufau, and he was kind of invisible for the first half of the season until the proper opportunities came. And so I would offer he might have a really strong role, and some of that also has to do with the fact that there aren't a lot of linebackers. Damone Clark has really kind of fallen out of favor with the Cowboys. Yes, they did trade for Kenneth Murray, but in many senses, Maris Liufau is kind of all they have. And Matt Eberflus, their new defensive coordinator, formerly their linebackers coach, that is the position that he's just kind of, got the right hand, the right touch with. And so I could totally see Maris having a big second season.
Okay, that's a good one. Because we've seen enough, I think, so far from Kenneth Murray to kind of know what he is and what he's not. And I don't think the Cowboys are going to be relying on Kenneth Murray to be a full-time contributor, because that would more than likely not be a good thing based on what we've seen so far in his career. Sanborn is an interesting player. And then, of course, they draft Shamar James. So give me a little insight there on a couple of those new linebackers, because those two guys might have an opportunity.
Yeah, I mentioned Matt Eberflus, obviously coming off being the Bears head coach. So, Sanborn kind of the only, real duty brought with him in that sense. Really athletic, really tests well. And so a lot of people are really high on him. I think we're excited, but just unproven relative to the Cowboys, which is why the jury's still out a little bit. And Shamar James was the lone trade the Cowboys made during the draft. They moved up in the 5th round, right after they had taken Jaden Blue. I mean, 3 picks later, they took Blue at 149. And while everybody was just kind of celebrating it, they moved up to 152 with Arizona and took Shamar James. And that, again, I think this is a Matt Eberflus guy, and somebody who they're going to allow to develop. And I think in that respect, it's important to note that Flus is the 3rd defensive coordinator in as many years for the Cowboys, with Dan Quinn and then Mike Zimmer. So, if this is his project to kind of groom for the life of the rookie deal, that, could turn into something. But right now, I think probably projects as just a special teamer, kind of the role that Maris Liufau had early on before the Overshown injury, the role that Damone Clark had early in his career, just kind of paying his dues, so to speak, on punt coverage and things like that. And so I think that people are, again, excited about Marisu Founds in year 2, Jack Sanborn offering something, and seeing if Kenneth Murray does have that change of scenery, to your point, like we talked about with Elam. He was traded for the Cowboys. He wasn't a free agent acquisition, obviously. You've noted that, but it is a different room. I mean, they're experiencing some change and some turnover in a full restart in a lot of ways at linebacker.
Sticking with the defense up front, you bring in a couple of guys, few guys. I mean, Fowler, we know what Fowler is at this point in his career. He's going to definitely help out, as far as the edge rush is concerned. Turner's another one of these guys, similar to what we just talked about with Booth and Elam in the secondary, early round pick, who just didn't work out. At this point in time, gets another chance. But let's talk about Ezeraku, because what was the fan reaction? What have you heard so far from himself and even from the team? Because again, there were some people early on, about a month or two ago, that thought his size was going to maybe keep him to like the 3rd round. But he just, as closer we got to the draft, man, he just became a hot candidate. And I just got to think the Cowboys are pretty happy to have him.
Yes, 3rd edge rusher they've taken in the 2nd round in 4 years. Took Sam Williams in 22 out of Ole Miss, and then took Marshawn Nealon last year. So and Sam Williams tore his ACL last year during training camp, so he's coming back from that. Obviously, that's difficult to note in something like this, but they have a lot of dudes. I mean, a lot of high pedigree, a lot of athleticism, a lot of speed. And I don't know that Donovan Ezeraku shows up and is, super flashy right away, because that didn't happen with Sam Williams and it didn't happen with Nealon last year. And some of that is just that DeMarcus Lawrence was, still taking snaps, like just, fighting off Father Time. And I would offer that that's maybe my biggest takeaway with how they've approached the position and letting Tank walk to Seattle, albeit with all the drama that unfolded right after. They have those snaps to give out now, because for the most part, outside of last year, DeMarcus was also generally pretty healthy for the Cowboys and generally didn't miss time. And Micah hadn't missed time until last year. So I think when the Cowboys have succeeded mostly in terms of edge rush, they've had this platoon, they've had these options, they've had this stable of guys to be able to work in. And I don't know, to your point, how you can say, okay, we're taking Dante Fowler off the field, and now, an exhausted tackle's got to deal with this super freak athlete that is Donovan Ezeraku. Sure. And so I think the Cowboys have found their Robin for Micah Parsons as Batman, someone to fully develop. So too. Yeah. And again, I don't know that Sam Williams ever had the real chance to become that, and maybe Marshawn Nealon does too, but they just don't have the same level of, unquantifiable, I don't know what this is about Donovan that he seems to have. And so highly productive, obviously, last year. And you can think of what you want, you will of that playing at BC. But ultimately, I mean, the value that they got from him was really absurd. And kind of like with Ted McMillan, I think if Travion Henderson or Luther Burden had somehow made it to them at 44, I think they would have gone in that direction. And because they didn't, they just said, okay, what's the best piece of meat here that we can get? Like we're cooking out for people. We've got brisket in the smoker already, but let's just get another one. Like, who cares? It'll feed a lot of people, and that's their approach right now.
Speaking of approach, what do you think it was taking a couple of defensive tackles in round 7?
Obviously, this class was hyped up in a lot of ways for being, rich at that position. Yep. Jay Toia has received a lot of high marks. I know a lot of people had him as 5th round grade and things like that. The Tommy Akingbasote pick is a little bit of maybe a preference of, we didn't want to fight anybody in undrafted free agency for this guy. Let's just pick him and put our stamp on him. I think that, a lot of people, when they look at your classic one tech nose tackle, it's okay, who can be a trash can, who can just, absorb,
sure,
physical attention. And Jay Toia seems like that dude, although with still a level of athleticism. And ultimately, I mean, the issue is still Mozzie Smith. I mean, they are still, putting Band-Aids on that and that miss, from a couple of years ago. And maybe he develops in a certain way, but they just haven't had that presence in a very long time. And I think they're still just, they're turning over every rock to try to find somebody to help out in that way.
Yeah. And it is one of those deals that you just can't do. I mean, you can miss every once in a while on a 1st round pick because every team does it, but you just can't keep doing it. Not just on those 1st round picks, but the 2nd round picks as well. And I think that's what's been missing for the Cowboys for just the last couple of years. But Look, it's before we turn over to offense, just taking a look one last time on defense. All the colors there, that's a lot of new. And I think that was necessary. We all knew that going into the offseason. And so now it's up to the coaching staff to try to get the most out of these kids, and see what you can unpack here, because where the Cowboys are right now, they're going to need a few of these kids to step up this season, not necessarily wait 2 or 3 years, especially the high draft picks. So.
No, I think that's well said. I mean, you mentioned kids. The oldest players they have from a draft age perspective is the oldest one is Donovan Wilson in 2019. I mean, you're talking about. I know it's been a minute, but like we're almost at the point where every player, at least from a leadership standpoint, was drafted post-COVID. Just to kind of put a line of demarcation. Like this is DeMarcus Lawrence is gone. Is maybe the best way to put that. I mean, your kind of stalwarts, your holdovers are gone. It's a completely new era.
Okay, so on offense, let's tackle that offensive line. So again, Booker is the first guy, and I think I don't think there's any question that if you're looking at a player that went later in the draft, that could be a really nice, again, if you want to call him a value pick or a sleeper pick, but that opportunity to get Cornelius in the 6th round, in my opinion, is really, really good luck, good fortune, and some smarts to be able to get a kid that talented. Because really, I know, of course, Connerly and Cornelius, they had a lot of tape, and Connerly was the one that got the big payday. But I just, this kid Cornelius has an awful lot going for him. I think he even has a few traits that I like more than Connerly. I know Connerly is where he is because he deserves to be, but to get him in the 6th round, it would not surprise me in the least to see him fighting for that starting right tackle job this season.
I will say that the right tackle spot is the most willing to be or most able to be threatened, just because everywhere else has, Cooper Beebe's not a first-round pick, but I mean, he's a second-year player. That's very clearly his position. And Obviously the 3 Tylers are all first-round picks, still all on their rookie contracts, although we'll see if Tyler Smith gets an extension this offseason. So Terrence Steele, one of those older players like I talked about, he was a UDFA himself in 2020, obviously, as you've noted. And so I don't know that I would go that far. And I would actually offer that, and this was interesting to me, when he was announced and when the Cowboys announced Cornelius specifically, they did so as a guard. Now, obviously, he played tackle at Oregon, and so you would assume that he would play there. But that was an interesting thing that they decided of their own accord. Sure. And so I don't know if that's their evaluation or their projection for him, obviously. But if he does play inside, then obviously that does, remove the capability for him to play outside. Now, maybe they do view him as some just sort of versatile piece. You never know. We need you to pinch it at tackle. We need you to pinch it at guard, whatever the case may be. But that was a very interesting kind of eyebrow raiser for a lot of people in the immediate moments when they took it.
Yeah, that is kind of strange. And it does maybe say either a little bit more than, because it's good that you mentioned that, because anybody who wasn't paying attention, especially since that was the 6th round, a lot of people maybe outside of Dallas did not even pick up on that. So that's great that you're able to do that. But yeah, who knows? That could mean anything. Let's now talk a little bit about the running back position, because that, of course, big news. You mentioned Jadon Blue. So they finally draft a running back, and they get one in round 5. They come back in round 7 to take the kid out of Clemson, who really was just banged up last year. Who knows what Clemson could have done? Maybe they could have upset Texas if he was healthy. He just wasn't. But Blue is their top running back as far as the draft is concerned. So looking at Javonte Williams, unproven still at this point, didn't make his mark with Denver. Miles Sanders just laid an egg with Carolina. Blue's going to have a chance to get a lot of reps here if he has a really good summer. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, if you'd asked Cowboys fans to lay out their top 5 running backs in the draft, I don't know that the Blue would have made the
Sure.
list. Some of that was just, everybody was obsessed with, if you put Genty on your list, fine. Maury on Hampton, again, those kind of go without saying.
Yeah.
Everybody crossing their fingers and hoping for Quinshon Judkins or Travion Henderson. As an Arizona State Sun Devil, I was just, I was dreaming upon dreaming about Cam Scatterbo, and so I'm pretty devastated with the results of that. But obviously, like I said, with Johnny Football, you have a lot of Texas Longhorn fans, so there is a high level of excitement here. And you look at, the Longhorn backs to come out over the last few years, right? They're all, I know Jonathan Brooks we're still kind of questionable about, but they're all fairly successful in the NFL. It will be interesting to see what type of workload he gets. Obviously, a little bit of a smaller frame.
Yeah.
And we don't know exactly how the Cowboys are going to go about this, but it is very clear and very obvious that they plan on running the ball. And it does seem like, maybe they all could have a piece here. I don't know that Phil Maffa cracks that rotation, early on. Maybe he's the Cowboys had an undrafted free agent fullback a few years ago in Hunter Lipke. It kind of seems like Phil Maffa might take that role. I wouldn't say it's a 1-for-1 comp, but the Mike Tolbert role in the Cowboys offense, so to speak. And some of that is, and this happens. They have a new head coach. Hunter Lipke's a Mike McCarthy guy. We're looking for Brian Schottenheimer guys at this point. That's just the way that the NFL goes. And so Brian talked about after the draft how he has some vision for how they're going to utilize Jalen Blue. And I think right now I would agree that Javonte Williams is probably the starter.
Sure.
But I don't know who I think leads we actually have a poll I worked on Tuesday morning that we're going to launch on Wednesday, and just asking our community who they think is going to lead the team in rushing yards. And I guess I would, if I had to bet, I would bet on Javonte Williams, but you just never know. You never know how that's going to materialize and grow and develop. But to your point, Jalen Blue is the highest level of draft capital investment they've made in a running back since Tony Pollard in 2019. So he was a 4th round pick. So we're talking about, one round of a difference. But so, and that's, and some of it is they had Zeke for a long time, but it is also worth mentioning this is the first year in which neither Tony Pollard nor Zeke will be a part of the Cowboys backfield since 2015. It's been a decade.
Wow.
And the leading rusher that year was a free agent who they had signed in Darren McFadden. And he went for 1,000 yards. That was the kind of the genesis of their offensive line. That was, I don't know if you recall, Lyle Collins was the undrafted free agent. He was kind of the final piece, and everything really, it was so easy for anybody to run behind that line.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're obviously hoping that by adding Tyler Booker, you can have a similar sort of domino effect. So it can be Javonte Williams, it can be Jalen Blue, it can be Miles Sanders even. But everybody, I know you and I spoke about this. It's hard not to look at the early 2010s Jets and feel like that's what Brian Schottenheimer is trying to do. But I don't know who his LaDainian Tomlinson is in this particular conversation.
Yeah. And the Jets also, I think it was I don't know if it was the first or second year. I think it was the first year when they had that bruising kid from Iowa too. I think they had Thomas Jones, and then they had this kid from Iowa. I think he was a rookie at the time. And man, I thought he was going to have a great career. But he was really their best back. He was a young, fresh back, and he had the fresh legs late in the season, and he had a huge game against the Chargers in the playoffs, and they get to the Colts.
Sean Green.
Yes.
Sean Green,
gets in the championship game against the Colts. Everything's going good in the first half. Green gets hurt, doesn't play again. Mm-hmm. Second half, offense goes nowhere, and then Green really doesn't have the career I thought he was going to have. But I bring that up because that was a 2 running back system really that he wanted, and Green was more of the power guy that he brought in to kind of wear teams down at the end of games. Not to say that that's what the Cowboys are made up of. I don't see that here, but Blue seems like a guy though that I don't see him as a full-time guy. I just see a guy that's going to be a big part of the passing game, and a guy that has obviously really good speed, and the more touches he gets, the better. That's probably the way you're going to look at it. Yeah,
he feels very similar to me from a contribution standpoint. I hope it's larger than this, but I don't know if you remember Lance Dunbar for the Cowboys was kind of a scat back, kind of a quick, passing game guy, kind of around 2015, 16-ish. But ultimately landing him and Phil Maffa together. I know we're talking about, a 5th and 7th round pick here, but it feels stylistically like when the Cowboys landed Felix Jones and Marion Barber together. Now, again, Felix Jones was the 1st round pick. Like, these are very different, levels of investment. But early in their careers, before Felix kind of, tapered off and Marion, God bless his soul, became who he was, Felix was kind of the general trope, thunder and lightning. Felix was kind of the lightning to Marion Barber's thunder. And so you do kind of see that here, I think, a little bit, like Jaden, the quicker guy, and Phil Maffa.
Yeah.
That's why I brought up Hunter Lipke's job might be in jeopardy. Phil Maffa is kind of your, okay, it's second and goal from the 3-yard line. Let's just run this thing in 3 times with Phil Maffa because he's massive. And so I don't know if that's exactly what Brian Schottenheimer is going for, but it's difficult to not make that guess at this point in time.
I like it. Absolutely. Because you can't count on Mike Sanders. That's for sure. After the way he's played the last couple of years. I mean, who knows? Maybe he's got one more year left in him. We know how this goes with free agent running backs. Anything's possible, as you said. And the same thing, we don't know if Javonte Williams change of scenery will do him good. So, but that approach doesn't sound like a bad idea. That sounds a little bit like we just talked about. Okay. So as far as the wide receiver room, now again, even though McMillan wasn't available, there was a lot of mock drafts out there. People thought, all right, Golden would be a really good addition here. It makes a lot of sense too. They didn't go that route. But then they basically didn't go that route at all until they signed a couple of guys who we just touched up on earlier. So I tell you the truth, I am not really that surprised. And the reason I'm not surprised is because I remember we tied this talk about Jonathan Mingo about, well, you don't use up a 4th-round draft pick on a receiver unless you really think that you're going to be able to turn him into something and he's going to be a pretty big part of your plans. If that's the case, and Tolbert continues to develop, you have a superstar at 1. Well, what else do you need? I mean, I know Tampa Bay, they're going the exactly opposite direction.
Oh,
it's
man.
like it's arena football with the Tampa Bay receiving class.
It's so cool.
Yeah. But, it makes Dallas. So it does make Dallas look like, oh, we got nobody outside of CD Lamb. But that's the kind of reason why I wasn't totally surprised was that maybe they just really believe in Mingo and believe in Tolbert's development, and that's their 3.
So, the cupboard isn't bare. You have CD Lamb, right? Like you're starting off,
Yes.
well ahead of the game, to be
Yes.
very clear here. But that was the case last year, and that's really been the case ever since they traded Amari Cooper away. Amari never played with this version of CD. CD had not fully become, to stick with the analogy, Batman. I mean, CD was still a Robin when Amari Cooper was around. And so you haven't given CD his own Robin. You did give Amari that, obviously. And so, I mean, I would offer that, there is not a Cowboys fan out there who believes that Jonathan Mingo is capable. And I feel badly for him, but he's sort of, bears the burden for the incompetence we all hold against the front office at this point in time. And Jalen Tolbert is entering the final year of his rookie contract and has yet to, show any semblance of being even a Robin, let alone a Batman, again, to stick with the analogy. And so, yeah, I mean, Kevontae Turpin is a nice player, but, you can't really rely on him offensively. Granted, they brought him back, or they gave him a new deal this year after giving him the RFA tender. But he's just kind of a part-time offensive player. He's a special teams professional. So Jalen Brooks is nice. Ryan Flournoy is nice. Like I have all these aren't even Robins at this point. Like these are the, like the Aquaman, like 3rd and 4th level characters in the movie. And so they really need that Robin. Now, there were reports that they were interested in trading for George Pickens. There are reports that they're interested in maybe bringing in a free agent, whether that's Keenan Allen or Amari himself at this point for a bit of a role reversal. But I mean, they really need that help. I don't fault them for not pressing the issue because the board just didn't work out for them. I will give them their grace there. But this is why you maybe had to keep Brandon Cooks. Maybe you had to be the team who took a chance on Stephon Diggs, although obviously he got paid, by New England because of their salary cap situation. Quite frankly, you can't do this because right now, even Jake Ferguson is not capable of being a general pass catching Robin. Like it really is CD and some dudes. I think it was Mike Leslie of WFAA called it CD and the lamb chops. I really liked that. And so they're just, if it's Jonathan Mingo, the whole world will owe the front office an apology. But I mean, he does feel like a bit of a sunk cost fallacy right now.
Well, we'll see again if there is that plan and there's a veteran plan and they feel pretty confident they can bring one of these free agents in, or maybe a trade is still possible. Then I guess we'll find out. We still have time to go before getting a final grade there. And you're right. I mean, just taking a look at the draft. Really, we just talked about it. Well, it wasn't past 1. Well, we really liked the 2nd round pick. We really liked the 3rd round pick. So Blue. Well, what are they gonna? You're gonna complain that you picked a running back? No.
Right.
So where was this receiver gonna come from? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and again, sometimes that's just the way the draft goes.
yes.
But you mentioned Tampa. I mean, they're like, we can't have enough, Batman. You know what I mean?
Incredible.
Like, and I was thinking this morning, actually, I had forgotten that Devontae Adams joined the Rams, and I'd forgotten that my thoughts started from me that ultimately I had forgotten that Cooper Kupp was in Seattle now. And so my point to myself was, if you believe JSN and Puka Nacua are Batman in their own right, you've given them Robins. You like all these. You brought up Tampa, but I would bring up Philly just because they're easy to look at if you're a Cowboys fan.
Sure.
I mean, you cannot have one Batman. There's not an NFL team out there who is, outside of maybe the Chiefs, that is dominating week, and maybe the Bills. But some of those things are that, Mahomes and Allen are like different kinds of Batman. You've got to have more options. And the Cowboys have learned that time after time after time after time. And so the frustration, I think, comes from not recognizing that mistake. And we're willing to, look in a vacuum and say the draft didn't go your way. Cool. You didn't force anything, but you had other opportunities. You had other avenues, and you didn't have to act desperate last year at the deadline and throw away that 4th round pick on Jonathan Mingo.
Yeah. I mean, and just taking a look at the Eagles, of course, it's an unfair comparison in a way because
sure,
they won the Super Bowl. They're the champs for a reason, but they did show you that, even though we have a number 1, we have a really good number 2, and we have a really good number 3. I mean, they have like probably the best top 3 receivers in the game, which is, again, kind of a hard comparison but everybody tries to emulate the Super Bowl champ. And I just look at it and say, you know what? I don't think that's the norm. I don't think you have to have a standout elite number 2 and elite number 3 to win a Super Bowl. It helps, but I don't think, if you have everything else working for you, then I think you might be able to get by, which is kind of weird to say, with CeeDee Lamb as leading the receiver room. But they just got to find it, like you said, you just got to find that second guy. And if they could find that second guy, I think the entire unit will take care of itself. And by the way, Holden and Kelly, just quickly on them. Holden had a couple pretty decent back-to-back seasons at Oregon. Pretty productive. He had about over 80 receptions combined. Looks like about 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns. He had a 15.9 average this past year, while Kelly had a monster year this year at Texas Tech. Unfortunately, from what I hear, he did not have good all-star games or draft pro days, whatever. It didn't look good with Josh Kelly, but the numbers are there. And unfortunately though, it's just another couple of guys thrown in with all the other guys that you're just, I guess, hoping one will emerge.
So. Yeah. And that's why I know I mentioned it already, but the Amari thing excites a lot of people. And if I could add a non-binary element to it all, to bring Amari back would obviously significantly, raise the floor of this group. But beyond that, I don't have to tell you, the Amari trade was very embarrassing for the Cowboys. Like it remains embarrassing. Like anytime, anybody breathes in the direction of it, at least I do my job to remind people how stupid it was for them to trade him away. And so for them to hypothetically bring him back would be this admission. It would be this swallowing of pride, which is not something we associate with this level of leadership. And so I'm rooting for it in that sense, in that, okay, you help out the position group and you prove to us that you've matured, you've grown up, you're capable of saying I was wrong, and now I'm willing to do what I can to rectify that.
That'd be nice. That'd be a good thing to hope for if you're a Cowboys fan, no question about it. I know you got to run, but before you do run, just last question. Give me is there? I guess we covered it. Would you say that the secondary and the receiver, that number 2 spot more than anything, right tackle, a little bit, but would that number 2 role wide receiver be the biggest concern right now for fans outside of maybe finding a nickel and also maybe a right tackle?
Yeah, I think so, because I think at right tackle you can live with Terrence Steele. I mean, if that's your worst offensive lineman, you really are living among the privileged, even if you don't recognize it. And the nickel corner, while it's a question and there are some questions and concerns about Trayvon, that answer is on the roster. That answer will be ultimately figured out throughout training camp or the preseason. There's no outside work required. The wide receiver 2 situation is I wouldn't say DEFCON 1, but it's like DEFCON 2. I mean, you've had all this time and you haven't done anything, and you tried, and respect to that, but it is going to require something creative that isn't just down the hall, like the dude you hired to be head coach. Like you're going to have to, really kind of, strap up your pants and put on your boots and go to work in a way. And you may have to swallow pride, or you may have to pay a big price, but you're going to have to bring somebody in, because you do not, I would argue they don't have, if they, lined up in 11 personnel right now, I would not trust the 2 of the 3 receivers is
Sure.
really what it comes down to.
Yes.
And so you need somebody to improve the secondary and tertiary levels of that, which is why that answer is not in your building right now. And that's why it's the most pressing concern.
Yeah, Mingo and Tolbert need this 3 months to prove, if they don't bring someone else in, to prove that, yeah, we're going to take that next step. And right. Their confidence in us is paid off. But I'm sure Cowboy fans are hoping that they don't have to hope for that. That's like the last possible answer to this issue. But, this is what the fun is of the off season. It's still early. Camps haven't even begun yet. But RJ, I appreciate your time as always. Again, I look forward to talking to you again for sure when we preview the camp and the preseason and maybe even the season. But if something happens big between now and then, maybe we'll be able to get you on for a very short segment just to talk about it, especially if they bring in another receiver. But I'll have links in the description of the video as well, especially as always, just to let everybody know, of course, where to find you. Obviously, we posted up your Twitter handle there during the show. And anything else? By the way, any of the Cowboy fans who haven't heard about you before, anything you want to say regarding some of the work that you're going to be working on?
Well, we're just going to start putting together this puzzle, like I said. And so appreciate you having me on as always. I'm at RJ Ochoa on most levels of social media, and looking forward to our next chat. And hopefully there is another receiver to talk about at that point in time. But I do want to say and we at Blog on the Boys, we really appreciate the work that you all do at Our Lads. You make our job so much easier, literally a daily tool in my life. So thank you all for hustling and bustling to get everything, looking nice and pretty so soon after the draft.
Well, we appreciate that. And I appreciate your expertise too, because anytime that you see anything that might be out of sorts, as far as our depth chart is concerned, we'll definitely make the change. And that's the reason why we like to do it too, because we rely on experts like you for their teams and the background. And we couldn't have a better Cowboys insider for us. So I appreciate it, RJ.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Greg.
You got it. Again, thanks to everybody for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, all that cool stuff here on the Our Lads Football Network. By the way, you can still purchase a PDF or a hard copy, but if you want the PDF in your inbox within minutes, just go ahead and check out ourlads.com. And we'll see everybody next time for another team interview. Lots of them to come with the draft in the review mirror. And we'll see everybody next time.